Hello everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. For this video series, I'll be analyzing and discussing Icewind Dale Rime of the Frostmaiden, one chapter at a time. At the time of these recordings, I have thoroughly read the book, but not yet run our campaign. Unlike my crafting series, these videos will offer general criticisms and advice without taking a deep dive into the changes and modifications I would make for my story and group. Warning before we begin, these videos will be full of spoilers. They're for DMs only. If you are playing Rime of the Frostmaiden or plan on playing the campaign, please do not watch these videos, but feel free to come back afterward or tell your DM to come watch them. In this video, we'll be looking at Chapter 2, Icewind Dale. And yes, I realize that I should not have called the series Icewind Dale Chapter whatever, because when we get to this one, it's Icewind Dale Chapter 2, Icewind Dale. Whoops, oh well. So this one is similarly structured to Chapter 1 in that it offers a bunch, and by bunch I mean over 10 different areas to cover. It's a very modular approach. You can choose, kind of pick and choose which ones you want to use. Some of them are better than others. Whereas Chapter 1 takes place in specifically the 10 Towns region and is designed for levels 1 through 4, let's say. Chapter 2 is designed for, I believe, levels 4 through 6. I think it says by the time you get to 7th level, you could still run them, but you're not going to gain levels anymore from doing them, and you're probably going to end up leveling outside of that content. So, whereas most of the adventure takes place fairly linearly, Chapter 1 and Chapter 2 can both be very much done out of order and placed anywhere because it's just a whole bunch of kind of, some of them more self-contained than others, but different regions around the area. Chapter 1 around 10 towns, and Chapter 2 just around Icewind Dale in general. We can go to the bigger map and kind of get an idea of the scope, which is quite different because in Chapter 1 you don't really have to worry about like travel very much. Obviously, you've got the towns, which are pretty safe to sleep at. It's just a lot more safe, and it's a smart way to design getting players, easing them into those lower levels before you actually start exploring pretty far out in Icewind Dale. Now, it's important to look at the actual legend here that explains how many miles away some of these things are, because while they look far away, actually not as bad as you're thinking. I do think that the actual rate at which players can travel, like on dog sled, for example, is not correct. I think that needs to be revisited. I think you should be able to go a lot faster if you've got sled dogs, for example. But some of these things, like it's only 10 miles from East Haven to the Cackling Chasm. Some of those aren't too bad. Just to get to the Sea of the Moving Ice, 13 miles from Bremen. There are some pretty far out places that you can get to, but also, as a DM, you can clearly put a lot of these anywhere. The only few restrictions you have is that Angajuk's Bell and Revel's End should both be on the coast on the Sea of Moving Ice, and then places like the Cackling Chasm and Karkolohk and even the Black Cabin are designed to be near various chasms or gorges. So there's a few restrictions here and there, but obviously you could just put like a gorge or chasm anywhere. It doesn't have to be restrictive on this map. If you stick around for the end of this video, I will rank all of these various areas that are covered in Chapter 2 from my favorite to my least favorite, and then we'll go in and actually analyze them right now. So Chapter 2 consists of two main portions, which is the breakdown of those bigger areas we can do, like the Black Cabin, Angajuk's Bell, Lost Spire, Netheril, etc., and also random encounters, which this is probably the least structured random encounters I've seen Wizards do. I think by now they've just kind of said like, hey, whenever you want a random encounter, just go for it. We're not gonna we're not really gonna put a whole lot of rules in terms of how often you should do them or be real restrictive on travel, which is fine. I'm totally for that. The encounters for the most part are pretty thematic with what you would find in the region, and they are not necessarily all hostile encounters. You could meet a bunch of dwarves from the Dwarven Valley with their little mining hall. You could meet some Chingwa, some Goliaths, which I believe results in a pretty fun little athletic minigame like tug of war or rolling boulders or something. They just might be like soccer hooligans. Like the whole race is just like super like jocks. One of them I would really recommend running is the White Dragon Averatress, which because she appears again in the Dark Duchess lair, which I would absolutely also run. So I think it'd be really fun to tease her once or twice. You know, not a combat encounter, obviously, but just show her around that the fact that there's this ancient white dragon flying around the area that you should probably look out for. I would definitely run that as a fun thematic encounter, not as a combat encounter. And then when she actually appears, you know, in close quarters on the Dark Duchess, that's all the more meaningful. The Herd of Beasts can be very fun. Just partly what you want to showcase here is that the region is in bad shape. Like there is a catastrophic event going on. Something that I'll talk about more in the crafting series is the fact that written in the book, the eternal winter has been lasting for 2 years. That is insane, because if you go, I mean, the sun is so integral to our biosphere that I can't imagine any region being without the sun for 2 years and not be just an absolute apocalyptic wasteland. So I would probably end up in my game at least shortening that, but in any case, you need to show the fact that this is a bad shape. There are monsters are being more feral. You know, plant life is dying out. Herds of animals are on the move. I mean, it's almost like the Land Before Time, where just you're trying to, you know, animals just on the move trying to search for any kind of food or anything. So very, very dire. And you can show that with the Herd of Beasts in terms of herbivores, just moving, you know, through areas. And you could show that obviously through carnivores like crag cats and yetis, peritons, snowy owl bears. You know, all of those are going to be on the hunt, which is interesting because a lot of times when you find beasts, they might not necessarily hostile in the wild. But in this campaign, you have a good excuse for why a lot of beasts would be hostile, and it's because they're in such bad shape and everybody's starving, so that could be very, very dangerous. So you definitely have to factor in random encounters, but I would also be very, very lenient on not necessarily throwing too. And you could do like you could do a blizzard and just do like themed things, like you can see, you know, eyes in the distance, or, you know, the cold light walkers are very cool to show, like they're kind of like walking humanoid lighthouses almost. Can be very creepy. Doesn't have to lead to an encounter right there. There's a lot of fun thematic stuff you can do while traveling that isn't just, oh, you know, you found a crag cat and it's going to attack you, roll for initiative. Although you could certainly do that a few times. So let's move on to the actual regions, which you can get your players there in I'll say 3 different ways. First of all, there are rumors the players can pick up in any town that is just basically giving you that location on the map and telling you there's something there that might be worth checking out. Usually just the bare minimum, like, hey, there's, you know, not even a quest associated with it, just go there. There's monsters, there's treasure. Do you really need an excuse? Your adventurers go. That could be fine for some of these areas, but it's probably the least, you know, the minimum. The other way is that there are actual quests for all of these locations, but some of them are much more interesting and better than others. Some of them are literally just characters approach you to go to that area. I mean, it's almost the same thing as the rumor. Like the distress signal for Ascendant is a bunch of telepathically, or it's not even just just say 4 psychically sensitive 10-towners. They hear that signal from Ascendant and go tell the players to go check it out. So it's a little bit more immersive than just hearing about the rumor of a crashed nautiloid, but not much more. Some of them are a little more personable, like the little teddy bear gnome Copper asks you to check up on his friend Macradius, who is the wizard who's been killed in the Black Cabin because he was trying to make this artifact to solve the everlasting winter. That's, you know, gives you a little bit more of an NPC connection. There's the actual Goliath problem, which can lead you to the Wyrmdoom and Skykytower shelter Goliath tribes. I believe they are, maybe they're not in prison, but they're like in debt, and she wants to bring back her tribes together. And it basically it comes up with a good way of connecting an NPC that cares about the Goliath tribes. Although I would recommend hopefully getting one of your players, if you have this chance, to play a Goliath and then just make them have that be their personal quest, just to kind of reunite the tribes. That would work very, very well. Otherwise, the third way, which is something I just thought of, is you could just use them as a random encounter. You could have your players just, you know, in the middle of a blizzard, they see the Black Cabin up ahead, and it's your only means of shelter, so you have to go in there. Or which we'll talk to the Cackling Chasm in a second, but you could put that outside of another dungeon. Just have your players have to get from point A to point B, and just happen to be this one dungeon is, you know, in the middle of there or something. Or in the Cave of the Berserkers works well for a random encounter too, because there's not even a quest for that location. You're supposed to just fight some Shardlin Berserkers somewhere, and I think you like see a ring that teleports you to that dungeon, and then you can get through that dungeon. So Not all of these quests are particularly interesting, but I appreciate that there's at least a quest for all of these areas. It really is up to DMs to pick and choose what you want to use and how you want to use it, and that's how we're going to go through all of these encounters, regions, layers. I don't know what you want to call these. They're not really full on. Most of them are not full dungeon crawls either. They're just kind of mini dungeons, if anything, or sometimes just encounters or social camps. It's just, and they're very similar to the ones that you see in 10 Towns. They're just scaled up a little bit and they're further away, which kind of assumes you're probably going to hit like 1 or 2 random encounters along the way. So the first one is Angajuk's Bell, which is the awakened whale with the bubble on top. Now, if you watched my video on Chapter 1, you know that I am not a big fan of the whole awakened animals thing. I think it's a little too Disney-fied in this otherwise kind of bleak horror-themed campaign. But I think Angajuk's can work kind of well because it actually has plot significance. It can bring the players to the Island of Solstice, to Oriel's main lair at Grimskala. So it serves a purpose. I don't think it's necessarily too goofy. In fact, you don't even have to have the whale speak if you don't want to. If you're really against it, you could just have it be this kind of neat little thematic journey, and it's almost like this magic school bus moment where you get on and you just kind of travel and you can just kind of paint a picture. There's no real, encounters or anything, and there's almost a missed opportunity for that. Although I understand there's this magic bubble that appears, so there's not really much monsters or fighting you can do, but it's I just think it's neat. The one I think there's 2 different events that can happen on this particular map though, and I think both of them happen before you actually meet Angajuk, which is when you ring the bell, a bunch of giant vultures attack you, which is just a combat encounter, and then at some point, especially if you're doing the whale hunt quest, I believe, you can have a bunch of whale hunters trying to hunt the whale, and that could also be significant on the return trip. Once you've kind of bonded with the whale, I guess you could have these thugs setting a trap for the whale, and hopefully the players will help defend the whale. So there's not a whole lot going on here, but I think it's, in terms of getting to an important destination later on in the campaign, it's an important one to run. In lieu of actually giving the players the rumor or the quest, I would probably just give the players this as an option for when it's time for them to go to, in Chapter 5, to the Isle of Solstice, and mention that, like, well, there's something more than a rumor, is that there's this whale that travels back and forth between the island, and let's go check it out and see if if that's true. And so I basically give that as a part of the quest chain instead of just a side quest that you could run, because I believe the other option is you can take a boat from Revel's End, and then I think there's a third one that I'm not quite sure of, but you've got different options to getting to the Isle of Solstice. So Angajuk, the quest isn't that great, but I think there is potential for this encounter in general, and I think it is the preferred method to get to the Isle in Chapter 5. The Black Cabin is an area that was not at all what I thought it was going to be. I admit I was very disappointed, because when you first hear about this area, you think, okay, here we go. This is our horror little mini dungeon. It's going to be super thematic. It's going to be creepy as hell. There's going to be some fun horror elements to do. And it just falls flat to me. Maybe I'm wrong, but I mean, it's this black cabin. It's situated on this edge of the gorge. There's this floor that can fall out and basically kill lower level players. I think it does. How much damage does that freaking floor do? I'm actually using the books. That's a little easier than flipping through pages in Roll20. 14d6 bludgeoning damage. That's a 14. This was a 140-foot drop. Like, that's pretty significant. So the whole thing here is that there was a wizard who was trying to solve the Eternal Winter. He built a device. The device was not done well, was not finished or whatever, and it blew up in his face and killed him, and now he haunts the area. But instead of this being a big horror thing, it's a part trap and part just kind of goofy, like, skill challenge. So the players can pick up the device that exploded, and immediately when they do that, it explodes again and deals 10d10 plus 35 radiant damage. That has an average of 90 damage, which should outright kill most players in the area. It's a 10-foot radius sphere of incinerating golden radiance. So anybody caught in that blast is vaporized. Now, that's a huge thing to do to players, but it's actually part of the quest chain here, which is odd. So you can, once you're dead, you can now talk to Macradius, learn his story, learn how to fix the device, and then hopefully only half the party died, and you can talk to the other half and kind of do this. And maybe that works. Maybe, you know, you have fun with the whole thing, because I don't think you can communicate with each other. So maybe you have fun, like little, you know, drawings, or do some poltergeist stuff. I don't, whatever method you can do, maybe you can make it into a fun element. If everybody dies, the book actually has a Goliath werebear show up unexpectedly, and then you can basically try to communicate with that character, which would seem very unsatisfying, and try to get them to fix the device. It's a bunch of skill checks that you have to do to fix this thing, and the actual device itself isn't even that impressive. So I was disappointed because I thought this was going to be a more classic horror themed moment. The one interesting thing about it is that once everything's done and you actually set this device off, which I believe only works for this one area, it's not as powerful as I was even thinking it would be. A Cold Light Walker shows up with some ice methods, as Auriel has detected that, you know, this device is trying to fight back against her everlasting winter, and then it starts feeling like a more horror thing where you like hold up and there's this creepy, you know, looking inside, and that like Cold Light Walkers are cool as hell, I think, and I love that aspect. So honestly, I'm leaning towards, if I was running this, I might still use this, but I would probably lean towards using it as a scripted random encounter where the players come across it, you know, while they're out traveling, hopefully to one of those further locations. They have to stop here, maybe in the middle of a blizzard, and basically redesign the entire thing as a classic horror movie moment. It's instead of the cabin in the woods, it's a cabin in the frigid tundra, and still use things like the Cold Light Walkers and maybe a ghost that was, you know, killed here, and have some fun with it. But I really don't like it how it's written at all, unless I'm really missing something, and maybe you've run it and it's gone over very well and everybody had fun with it. It just doesn't feel necessarily right to me, but I think it's got potential with that actual location. Cackling Chasm is the weakest. I'll go ahead and say that without having to wait till my rankings. Actually, it's not the never mind. It's not quite the weakest, but it's one of the weakest. It's a dungeon with a bunch of gnolls, and it's not even that interesting because the gnolls are rebelling against their leader because they're all dying because it's, you know, everlasting winter and they can't get any food, and they're having to resort to cannibalism. That's bad news. So when the players enter, the gnolls don't even fight them. I don't even know if it's very well communicated that they want the players to actually go hunt down their leader and kill them and then let them escape. So that's kind of bizarre. There's not a whole lot going on here. The dungeon seems like it has a huge amount of potential with 100 feet drops, but again, there's one combat encounter, if anything. There is a Shardolin Berserker here who's been captured by the gnolls. I guess that could be a tease for the Shardolin Berserkers, but otherwise, it's another area where it's just hugely disappointing. There's no storytelling here. You almost feel like it'd be more interesting if, like, the gnoll leader wanted to work with the players and how to escape their situation, but then that's kind of similar to how Karkolohk works with the gnome as the goblin. So I'm not sure how to make this area work, although once again, I like the actual map and the idea with this chasm cutting through these caves. I'm almost tempted to, kind of similar to the Black Cabin, reuse this dungeon as a completely different encounter, gut everything inside, and make it as either, I don't know, there's treasure in there and make it worth exploring, or it's just you have to cross this area to get from point A to point B. So maybe still some potential in the map, but the actual area as written is just not interesting at all. Cave of the Berserker is a strange one because there's no actual quest associated with here as far as I can tell, nor I don't think there's even a rumor here, which is very weird. There's like 13 of these areas and there's only 12 I think that are mentioned as an actual quest and a rumor. There's nothing on the map that brings you to Cave of the Berserkers. In other words, the only way to bring you here, again, as far as I'm aware, is if you fight a Shardolin Berserker, you look at a ring, I think, that they have, and the ring teleports you to the outside of this dungeon. Now, it's a nice little cave dungeon. When you enter, it's got some silver dragon wormlings that can attack you, and there's a hidden tunnel, so one attacks from behind and one attacks from in front. That's pretty interesting. And then inside, there is, I believe, just a single Shardolin Berserker, but there's a magic effect in this dungeon where as long as this fire is running, the Shardolin Berserkers cannot be killed. That is a pretty big deal that your players may not pick up on at all. And they would be very, I mean, you need to start telegraphing that to your players, especially if you think you would do the killing blow. You need to see some kind of magical effect going on to clue your players into that, because that could be really weird. And it doesn't have anything to do with, like, there's no real story moment for it. It's supposed to be like just Auriel's, I guess, blessing. that's on this fire, but I don't really get why there's this magical fire here, and then the players can't really do anything with this magic. I mean, they could put it out, but it doesn't like help them at all. So they would have to know that's the fire doing it, and then be able to cast a spell magic on the fire to stop this effect. There's only the one Charlton Berserker, but do note that these Charlton Berserkers are very, very powerful, like shockingly powerful. Let's actually pick one up here. Where are my creatures? I was actually shocked. I think they're a CR4, so we have to watch it. They have 90 hit points and 3 attacks, and they've got the Barbarian ability to just gain advantage on all their attacks. Now, they have a big negative trait where every turn you have to roll a d6, and if they roll a 1, they're just stunned that turn. They don't get to do anything. But on the flip side, especially if you have a bunch of them, they can do that, and they can poison people with every single attack with a TC 13 con saving throw. Like, these are hard. I mean, 90 hit points. They're going to stick around for a while. So be careful with that. And then as you're leaving, which is something oddly this campaign likes to do in a lot of these areas, they put enemies at you as you're leaving. There's a trio of them coming in. Now that's interesting because if the players figured out what that fire does and the fact that it's in that zone, which they would have no way of knowing unless you were really being forthwith about telling them that as a DM, they try to rush inside the dungeon before actually fighting the players. I guess the players could just hightail it out of there because the Charlton Berserkers have all the advantage in the dungeon. So I don't know if I like the whole flame makes them immortal thing because that doesn't seem to make much narrative sense to me. But it's a decent dungeon. It looks cool. It's got the giant like jaw gate. I like the dragon wormlings. It's another. This one at least I would probably run more as written and make it so the Charlton Berserkers in my campaign I would make that more of a big deal. Where Charlton can, if you have a weak mind and you're using Charlton, it definitely corrupts you and turns you into one of these Berserkers. So I don't know what the reason would be to go here and track them down, but there would be hopefully some kind of quest involved, because otherwise I don't know why players would go inside this one particular dungeon. But I think it can be pretty useful, but in terms of exciting like story moments or something, it's lacking in that for sure. So not one of the better ones. Dark Duchess is one of the better ones. Finally, we get to one that's just straight up awesome, and this is a Ancient White Dragon Lair of Aberatris, which is the really fun, what looks like a very well-written Ancient White Dragon character because she's extremely old, obviously very powerful, but she's got like cataracts, can't see very well. She's kind of an old lady dragon, and she's got the corpse of her like wizard master riding in a saddle that she still talks to and loves dearly, but he's just a frozen corpse on her back. And it's to where like if he falls off, then she's like, oh, freaks out, wants to like put him back on and ask the players to like help her. Like it's just magnificent. I see so much joy coming from this otherwise terrifying creature that could be a lot of fun. And I think that the actual dungeon here is very neat because obviously having a ship just like parked on top of the tundra is a very cool theme. And when you get there, there's still combat to be had. There's still events happening. There's a bunch of kobolds, which I believe are servants of the dragon. They're holed up in a hold as an ice troll trying to get at them, so the players can kind of suss that out. There's obviously a combat encounter there. There's some socializing with the kobolds. There's obviously a lot of loot to be had. I wish there were a few more interesting things to be had in the middle, in the upper level of the deck. I think it's mostly just empty in here. But still, I mean, this one's really got everything. It's got exploration, it's got socialization, it's got combat, and when the dragon plops down and starts looking around, I think you can really ham it up as the fact that she's, yes, very powerful, but also kind of an old lady who's lost her marbles. And I think that's an extremely fun thing to do with an Ancient White Dragon. And the map looks great. You can see all the like little claw marks all over this map too. So I would absolutely run this. I'm not sure about the actual quest. Maybe the rumor would work better because I think the quest is like, hey, go get us some rum or something stupid like that. Whereas the quest, you can hear me flipping through, or sorry, that was the quest. The rumor for Dark Duchess is there's just a pirate ship in the ice, and there should be some treasure in there. You can also, I believe, use one of the secrets, which kind of describes a backstory for one of the players, and that they were, I think, part of this pirate ship crew, or at least they already know about it, so that would be a way to give your players here, so that's probably a pretty solid way, but I would 100% run this in every campaign of Rime of the Frostmaiden, and hopefully you've teased that white dragon already so the players know that it's out there, and then when they see it appear up close, they're like, oh crap, we're screwed. Until it starts talking, they're like, okay, maybe we can work with this. Ascendant is another amazing location. Obviously, Baldur's Gate 3 has introduced us all to the magic of the Nautilus. I mean, you might have already known about it, but for folks like me who mainly know D&D through 5th edition, this is how we're introduced to the Nautiloid. I love that we're going to get this in Rime of the Frostmaiden, and it's a really neat location that, again, turns otherwise, evil, powerful creatures on their head, because these are gnome Ceramorphs. Is that the actual stat block called? Gnome Ceramorph? Let's see. Gnome. Yes. And they are, first of all, they're adorable. Look at this. Look at this. That's amazing. And they're not that hostile. They kind of seem like an odd, like a friendly couple with their kids, and their kids are all like messed up squidlings, which I thought were just baby versions, but because the Ceramorphus like turns you into an illithid like right away as an adult, these are actually just like mutant versions that didn't quite make it right. They're like just offspring that didn't quite correctly evolve, I guess. So they just kind of look like messed up toddlers that are hunting for brains. So you've got that going for you. There's carrion crawlers outside. At one point, a boulet comes and attacks you as you're trying to leave. But when you're in there, these funny gnome Ceramorphs are just kind of wanting to work the players. They're like, hey, can you help us fix our ship? And then, or can you help us like make it to town because our life support's going to end? Like they're just kind of in trouble looking for help. There's a downed ship, but it's a huge nautiloid, and they're friendly, but they're still illithids. They have, and their whole job is they've been collecting creatures and different areas of the in Icewind Dale. You can find these like egg-shaped pods that hold these creatures, and that's one of the best like backstory secrets you can give to one of your players, is that they were initially kidnapped by one of these creatures. Maybe you don't have to do the whole like they actually have an illithid inside them and do the whole actual Baldur's Gate 3 thing, but you can at least have them be a captive, and that's how they ended up in the Icewind Dale region, is because the ship crashed and then their pod broke out and they just got up and walked over to town. So that's a really cool backstory for a player character, and adds to the fact that maybe they really hate these guys, even though these guys aren't outwardly hostile unless the players start, firing their laser guns. There's also a flesh golem here that acts as like the butler or maid for these little squidling kids. I just love this whole area. It's really cool. And the players can pick up laser pistols and laser rifles, which is also very, very cool. This one has an excellent hook involved that is very organic and fun, which is if you run the Tourmaline Beautiful Mine quest dungeon, and within that dungeon, in one of the mine alcoves, you can find an illithid skull, and inside of that is a psi crystal, which happens to be, of course, the exact device that you need to power this ship. And when the players pick that up, I would absolutely immediately put this dungeon on the map and say, you feel a psychic connection emanating from this direction, and that's how you pull your players to here. And then when they get there, that's obviously what this, and that Ceramos maybe can tell what it is, and maybe you can bargain with the players, and hey, we'll give you our pistols and we'll take this crystal. But then the players be like, do we really want to help these guys? Just want to fight them? Like, just, it's all amazing. It's all already there. This is one of the few regions of this chapter that I would have to change the least out of everything else, which is a huge thumbs up to me. So Ascendant is awesome, as is, especially if you run it from built off of that psi crystal from the Beautiful Mine, which I think Beautiful Mine is also a great dungeon from chapter 1. The Jarlmoot. So I understand why Wizards didn't want to go necessarily too hard with the whole Frost Giant thing, because we covered a lot of the giant stuff with Storm King's Thunder. This one actually has a pretty decent quest in that you get a guide in the form of Iselm, I believe, a Frost Druid, which all Frost Druids are evil, apparently. I did not know that, or at least all the ones in this campaign. And she leads you to this area. Let's see, Isem's Way, yeah. And when you get there, it's like an ancient meeting place for giants, and the ghost of one of the head giants appears. There's a cool picture for that, and summons a frost giant skeleton. So it's like an arena match that you have to fight to prove yourself, and then I believe you have to fight some invisible stalkers, and then once you win, the throne rises up literally right here on the map, and you go down into this dungeon. And then that's when Iselm just wanted to get inside there, basically, and she turns on the players, and it's like a third combat encounter. So you have to do like basically these 3 different waves of enemies, one after the other, just to gain entrance to here. And then once you've gained the entrance, you solve like a little kind of cute Fifth Element style puzzle where you have to deduce which thing goes on which object. And of course, all the things are in this nearby chest. You don't have to necessarily just come up with them. And then it's got a treasure chest. I would maybe even up the treasure here. You get a Horn of Blasting, which is pretty solid. if you go through everything. But it's still, you had a lot of combat. You solved the puzzle. You had to make your way all the way out here. I think there's flying battle axes you have to fight to get through. Players do a lot of work just to get this one horn of blasting. And on top of all that, again, the campaign loves to do this. When you're leaving, there's another enemy approaching, and that is an actual frost giant who's here to take this same quest, and she thinks that she's here to, earn the horn of blasting and everything, and she sees it on the players and immediately gets into another combat encounter. So the players have to do a lot to be able to earn this. I think this location is very good. I like the frost giant feel of it. I think you could play up the whole arena, maybe make it a whole council. I put a little social encounter there where they're arguing about, oh, we can't let these non-giants. And one of them says, oh, let's test them in combat, and then summon a bunch of creatures. And you can easily scale it because it's that one combat encounter. I mean, you could summon 3 frost giant skeletons if your players want to do it later on at level 6 or 7 or something. So I would probably scale it, maybe change the treasure around a little bit. And if I can pull off the whole frost druid leads you here and then turns against you thing, I would probably try to do that. That's, I think, a hard thing to do on players. They're usually pretty insightful about NPC allies in that way, but I think that could be an effective way of making it even more challenging. Even if she initially helps the players, but she just wants to gain access to it and then maybe tries to take them down after the fact. So pretty cool location, Jarlmoot. Then we're going to Karkolohk, which is your goblins. You can't do a D&D campaign without goblins. I don't make the rules, but we do follow them. This one has a really, really fun twist. This would otherwise be a fairly standard goblin stronghold. The actual map and location is very cool. It's on the edge of a cliff. There's even a little pier that just goes off into the cliff, and it's all built. I mean, 30 and 50 feet high is very high. That could be extremely interesting if you're fighting on the ground level. Those goblins are getting half or three quarters cover. There's a lot of goblins in here, so players need to watch themselves. But the cool twist here, and absolutely the one that I would do, is that the goblin leader is actually a gnome in disguise. It's just because the goblins are kind of dumb. They don't quite pick up on the fact that that's what's going on here. And I would do the twist where he wants out. Like, he has maybe sent a missive to the whatever city the players are in. And, the diplomatic message says, hey, send some folks out and we'll talk diplomacy here. It works very good on top of foaming bugs, maybe because that one went wrong or something. The goblin caravan, or the goblins trying to steal a caravan. And this, which I forget his name, Chief Yarbnock, sends that message saying, hey, send a diplomatic envoy and we'll talk. And then when the envoy makes it all the way into which I love that you can tease the fact that they've got all these defenses and things, and you make it all the way in there and talk to the chief, and then he reveals, oh, I'm actually a rock gnome that was basically the last survivor of a caravan. I quickly threw on this stuff and used some magic to trick all the goblins thinking I was a goblin. They made me the chief. And I kind of reveled in being their leader for a while, but now I want out because obviously this winter's gotten so bad, the goblins are turning on each other and they're starting to suspect me, and I'm really nervous. Help me get out of here. That is a really fun twist because now the players are deep in the middle of this dungeon and they need to be able to get out of here and save him. Now, you need to have him be able to reward the players somehow. I don't know what the hell you're going to have him that he's got that he can reward the players with, but maybe knowledge of another location or something. But again, if you can follow that chain of events and then have the players have to do like a reverse infiltration, they just have to get out of here very carefully and make it so there's some stealth social checks, but probably it breaks out into combat at some point. I think it could be very effective. There is a shield guardian here that with the shield amulet at another location, I believe it's the Lost Spire. So you could do it in that order, or you could just have them see the shield guardian and later grab the shield amulet, or that makes them have to want to go back here. I'm probably going to get rid of that in my campaign because we already did the whole Shield Guardian thing with Tomb of Annihilation. And Shield Guardians are very, very powerful, so you have to watch yourself with giving that to Tier 1, even Tier 2 players without nerfing the Shield Guardian, because otherwise it will basically be equivalent to a pretty strong level like Fighter PC with some good defenses. So it's a very cool reward to give your players a powerful ally, but just be warned that Shield Guardians are very strong. Look at that stat block and think twice before. When I added the Shield Guardian to the players in Tomb of Annihilation, which granted it was a much lower level, I think they got it at like 4th level or something, I nerfed it quite a bit on purpose. But I think Karkolohk can be very fun if you do it from that standpoint. If you're just running it as a standard dungeon crawl, it's still kind of a fun map, but it's just basically goblins, doesn't necessarily have that fun, ice, snow themed flavor. But if you run it with the twist of the goblin revealing that he's actually a rock gnome in disguise and wants to get out, then I think Karkolohk becomes one of the best areas of interest in Chapter 2. The Lost Spire of Netheril is probably one of the more important locations you can run because it actually teases the final end game for this entire campaign, which is that you're hunting down this ancient Netherese city, Etherin, in the bottom of a glacier. This is part of the spire that has broken off, and later when you get to the city, you will see that one of the spires is missing. And it's also a neat aspect to get to a dungeon that's literally upside down. That's very cool and thematically interesting. There's like, holes you have to crawl through, and just, it's just weird to be able to have to go through this otherwise kind of laboratory area just completely upside down. There's not a whole lot of combat here. It's not a big area. There's a basilisk, there's a will-o-wisp, and when you're leaving, again, campaign likes to do this, when you're leaving the dungeon, a bunch of bugbears are showed up just looking for shelter, although oddly this one is the least combative of all the groups that show up. You can actually even hire them. They're just kind of looking for like shelter and a nice meal and a place to work, so that's something. The main thing that's here is that you will find Dazan's Simulacrum, which the real Dazan was burned alive at the stake in East Haven, which was one of the events that happens in East Haven, among a lot of events that happen in East Haven. Talked about that in our last video. And he's found basically a device that can try to make the Simulacrum real. This is one that I would probably end up changing a bit. The chamber seems like it's cool, but it's up to a dice roll, which, I mean, you could make it up to a dice roll, but I like the idea of having scripted events occur. And I think instead of a black pudding, a gibbering mouther would be a more appropriate creature if the mutation goes wrong. Or do the classic the fly thing, where a little insect or bug makes it through and then have the exporting creature be some kind of horrible mutated thing. That would be a really fun way to do it. Or you could have this be the real Dazan and have it be like he's been creating clones and just kind of sending them out to different areas, which would be really fun if you end up meeting other like clones out in the wild that he's been doing this. But then you'll have to figure out like, well, what's the motivation for him staying here? Is he just researching this area? I would kind of work it into the main campaign that for some reason you need to visit all of the Arcane Brotherhood members for whatever reason, which is Dazan. Hopefully you've already got Valen. Avarice, which is going to be a tricky one, but that's in the Knights of the Black Swords in Chapter 1. Nas Lantamir is currently dead, but she's on the Island of Solstice, so that you could put her anywhere. And Valish Gaunt is one I would also include, because that's a good excuse to go to Revel's End, which we'll be getting to that in a moment. So I like the Lost Spire from a main campaign point of view. I would probably end up changing how the Rune Chamber works. And maybe let the players even play around with it. Maybe they want to try to clone themselves and see like the different effects that can happen. I would play it up and make it interesting and have Dazan serve maybe a different kind of purpose, or he could just be here and still wanting to research things and be useful information. That could be it too. So you could play around with what it is here, but I would make this a for sure stop some point in the campaign. Maybe you could wait to do this one after the actual tier 1 saga is over, you've defeated Zardarok and all that, and then this one is a tease for the future, and you could do it maybe on your way to the Island of Solstice and that whole thing, so that you can tease the actual Netherese city that you're going after. But I would definitely include Lost Spire of Netheril. The Reghed Tribe Camp, this one is the weakest because there is no actual real quest associated with here. Basically, this entire area is just used for if you're wanting to meet these nomads, which there are, I think, 3 or 4 different tribes are all associated with animals. And they all have slightly different kinds of cultures. This map is mainly useful for when you're doing the trials, and we'll talk about that in Chapter 5 to get the Codicil of White. You have to perform a bunch of trials, which I believe all have to do with the Reghed Tribe camps. You're like teleported to these different camps and have to perform different tasks that are associated with like Winter's cruelty or isolation or something. And that's where you can use these literal maps for. I guess you could have your players stumble upon the tribe camp outside of the actual glacier, which is more where they're located. But otherwise, there's not really anything going on, and there's no quest associated with here. You would, as a DM, you would have to come up with your whole other thing to do it here. So this one is as a area in this chapter, it's literally less than a full 2 pages, I think, whereas most of these are multiple pages long. So there's not really anything going on here. Revel's End is interesting because that is a prison This is probably the most disappointing location for me, because when I think of a like cool prison in D&D, there's all kinds of neat possibilities that could spring up here, and I think your players could have a lot of fun with. But as written, nothing really happens here. It's incredibly disappointing. Like there's not even like prisoners that are given stat blocks and personalities and motivations and things. It's just like, hey, roll a d6 and this person's a thief and this person's a whatever. There's one exception, that is the Valish Gaunt, who's apparently a villain from Legacy of the Crystal Shard, which is, I believe, a book that takes place in Icewind Dale. I think he was the villain from that story, and is a former Arcane Brotherhood. I would probably include him into the story, because otherwise there's no reason for your players to go here. There's no real connection, and that is the quest, is you have to just talk to Valish Gaunt. But he doesn't really know anything other than, I think, the latest about what the Arcane Brotherhood's purpose is here, and he can, I think, talk a little bit about who the other wizards are. As a DM, I think you can use this location, but it needs a lot of work. First of all, it's not the most attractive map, but I think if you're going to put your players in here, you need to stage some events to occur. Here's the two ways you can do this. One, you run it straight. Your players have to come in here and just talk to Valish Gaunt, but then you stage like a breakout, or maybe, I don't know, something, the security system goes down. Maybe there's like a blizzard and the power shuts out, or something happens, an inciting incident happens that traps your players in here and causes things to go wild, and you could have a whole like string of sessions as you try to like take back this prison. I'm picturing all those like movies like Lockdown and stuff. Like you could have a lot of fun with this. The other way to do it is if your players are given the mission that you need to break out a prisoner from this area. And obviously the warden and stuff's not gonna be too happy about that. So you have to go in with that mission as like a heist, like prisoner rescue, and have to get Valish Gaunt out of there. Maybe he's mentioned the fact that I'm not gonna talk unless you get me out of here. And now you've given the players a mission that they can be proactive about. So none of those are in the book. You would have to come up with all of that stuff, but I think that has the potential to be some of the most memorable stuff you can do in this campaign that can be very player focused, and something that I would be looking at crafting for sure. But as written, there's not a whole lot going on here. I think a spectator is guarding like the armory or something. Otherwise, a bunch of guards. Even the prison warden's like a harper in disguise. They're not even a corrupt prison warden. They're an actual harper, which means they're like a super good guy. It's just lame. It's so disappointing for what a cool idea it is to have this isolated, creepy, maximum security prison on the edge of the cliff in the middle of the tundra. So as written, not great, but a lot of potential if you take from a lot of like prison, fiction stuff and movies. I think you could have a lot of fun with Revel's End. All right, the final two areas are both intrinsically connected because they are just two different Goliath tribes that are currently not seeing eye to eye. They are not at war with each other, but they are not on friendly terms because of an incident that happened in the past where it was almost an accident where somebody got bit by a griffin. So the Skytower shelter are it's on a cliff face, and they are the griffin taming Goliaths. They are not friendly to outsiders at all. They're not outwardly hostile, but they're just kind of very gruff and dour, and they're all about taming griffins. And in the Wyrmdoom shelter, they are more friendly to outsiders, and they are definitely the soccer hooligans. They're the jocks who are interested in doing all these games and things. So the whole goal here is to bring these Goliath tribes together, which I think is pretty compelling and fun. And I would even, like I said, try to have a Goliath party member who's that's their whole personal arc, is to like reunite these two tribes. And to do so, you need to bring them together. You need to talk to one and the other. I believe there's mini quests you can do for each of them. They're not even quests. They're like, one of them is like, can you heal this Aarakocra? Like, I would expand that to where each of them has a more substantial quest. Maybe go to one of these other, hey, can you go to the Cackling Chasm and do this? Can you go to here and do this? Give them more substantial quests that feels like your players earn that right to be able to talk to the head honcho and be like, hey, I've earned your trust. Now you need to listen to me and bring these two tribes together. Maybe have them meet at Jarlmoot or something cool, and then something blows up from there. Like you could really combine things together here, but it takes, again, a little bit of extra work on the DM's part. But at least the whole Goliath feud is written in the book as a thing that the players should be able to tackle. And I think it's a good part of this campaign, and one that the players probably should tackle. Because the Goliaths are a major part of the area. So it doesn't have much to do with the main story, but again, hopefully you've got a main character Goliath, or you've introduced an NPC Goliath who the party likes, and you could then use these to, just kind of a fun little side event for them to reunite these Goliath tribes. All right, so that is all of the different areas of Chapter 2 Icewind Dale. Since you've stuck with me this long, maybe you've guessed my rankings by now. Give you a moment to think about it, but I will give you my rankings from my favorite locations to my least favorite. My number 1 favorite location in Chapter 2 is Ascendant. The Nautiloid is very, very awesome. I love the twist that it's basically their 2 dads and their 3 kids. They've crashed. They just want to get out of here. You can have the extra effect that the player actually has been kidnapped from them before, and that's how they ended up here. And I like the draw from one dungeon, which is the Beautiful Mine, with the Psy Crystal, bringing them to Ascendant. Everything runs just perfectly beautiful. Number 2 is Dark Duchess. A white dragon layer, but she's a hilarious character, and then it's just got a good mix of there's some combat there's some exploration, and there's some socializing with the dragon itself. It's terrifying, but also the players have a chance to steal some good loot with possibly being murdered by a giant ancient white dragon or escaping with their lives and living to tell the tale about it. Number 3, Lost Spire of Netheril. Even though it might not have the most going for it, it's such a critically cool location to tease because we're going to spend all of our endgame in Ithrin, and there's going to be all of those kind of Netherese things about it. So if you tease that stuff decently early on, it's a really effective storytelling device. And obviously it's got the Arcane Brotherhood member there, Dazan, who can be an important character as well. Number 4 is Karkolohk. The Goblin Stronghold is actually pretty well designed. It's fun to look at. It's got all that height elevation difference and the awesome twist that the chief is actually a freaking gnome in disguise who just wants out. I think is amazing. Number 5, Jarlmoot. I like if you can pull it off, the druid that turns on the players, the guide, the arena battle that happens, the cool little council of frost giant ghosts that appears, and the lower dungeon that ends up with a little 5th element puzzle, and then a treasure at the end, and the frost giant fight at the end. Just a good kind of series of events that should be satisfying for the players. Number, what are we on, 6? Revel's End, the prison. This one is more about me seeing the potential in the dungeon than the dungeon as written, but I appreciate that it's there, that it exists. It would take a lot of extra work though, and at this point we've kind of transitioning from the ones I think are really good to the ones that I think are okay, starting with Revel's End. But again, it could be one of the best areas if the DM does some fun stuff with it. Next, Skykytower and Wyrmdoom, both kind of together. I just like the whole Goliath feud. Neither of them were given full maps with different rooms and stuff. Neither of them should really be exploration or dungeon crawls at all. It's more about the social manifestations of these 2 Goliath tribes meeting together. I do think it's worth adding in some more like side quest content to actually get them to come together. Angajuk's Bell is mostly important to get the players to the Lost Spire, the island of Solstice. I think it's one of the more interesting ways to do it. Next, Cave of the Berserkers. It's okay. I think it can be a fun random event, but as it is, I'm not sure how to bring the characters there in a proper way other than manufacturing some extra NPC or item the players would need that happens to be in there. If you can't tell, we're getting to the bottom end now. Black Cabin, I would re-gut it completely. I like the idea of a horror cabin, and this one just doesn't do it for me. Cackling Chasm, bunch of gnolls that don't even want to fight the players, seems very odd to do, although you could repurpose the dungeon. And then the Reghed Tribe, there's just nothing to do there at the very bottom. You'll be reusing that map for Chapter 5, but otherwise probably not going to be using the actual map in Chapter 2. And that will do it for Chapter 2. I appreciate you sticking with me for this long. None of the other chapters should be nearly this long because these Chapter 1 and 2 involved a lot of different areas and different places and things to cover. The next one should be a lot more of a focused on single areas or single events. I look forward to looking at those. Thanks.